comprehensive, compassionate, and shame-free sex education will enable you to live your values more fully. The more educated you are, the better equipped you are to align your behaviors with your values.
How are you helping mothers and parents be able to support the next generation so that they can grow up more educated?
Well, that I'm trying to help parents understand is that they are the sex expert in their home and that they should be the primary resource.
What would you say to women, maybe they're not in an intimate relationship now, they're pregnant, or maybe they are postpartum already and they have multiple children?
Well, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I would choose
Welcome on Carlie. Carlie is a shame-free sex educator for Christian women and mothers at all stages of life. She also has her master's in marriage, family, and human development. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I have to start with how did this job, this evolution even start for you? I came across you on Insta and then we chatted and I'm like, this is so needed for women and mothers because I know it's a huge topic that a lot of people are afraid to talk about or even express. So I'd love to hear how this journey evolves for you, maybe your own healing journey and what led you to this work.
Yeah, for me, it mostly started just as a personal attempt to educate myself about something that I had never learned about growing up. I grew up in a very happy, very religious home, and my parents are phenomenal in almost every area, but sex ed in the home was not one of them.
Yeah.
So I just never really learned anything. There wasn't a lot of explicit shame or anything around bodies in my home, but there wasn't a discussion. So I assumed it was shameful because there was never a discussion.
Yeah.
So when I went to college at 18 and started dating more seriously for my first time, I realized, okay, my sex education is really, really lacking. And so I started a journey to try and educate myself, but I didn't feel like there were a lot of resources for people like me. I was Christian and choosing to wait until marriage to have sex, but I wanted to be educated about it. And the only resources I could find for Christians were for married couples. So eventually I just decided to study it in school. I did my undergraduate degree in human development and then went on to get my master's in marriage, family, and human development, researching healthy sexual relationships specifically. And I actually graduated with my master's before I ever transitioned into marriage and into a sexual relationship. So that was a personal journey to educate myself. And then by the time I started graduate school, I knew that I wanted to be an educator. I knew that there were other people like me who had grown up with little to no information, who needed somebody that they could trust, who would teach them openly and kindly without shame. And so I decided, all right, I'll try to be that person. Initially, I had planned to go the professor route, but I started the Instagram during COVID and it took off pretty quickly because people were really desperate for this information. And so I focused more on online education and I love it.
That's amazing. I honestly think that's just a tribute to how many women and mothers really need this information.
Yeah.
And really, we need to start sharing more stories and conversations around this to reduce the shame around it. And you brought up a great point too and I didn't even think about it until you were chatting about it with me, is it typically a lot of the education we get is after marriage, not before, because even maybe learning about it or wanting to express more interest in it before could also be attached to that shame piece too. So how are you navigating educating women before marriage? What are some of those things that you feel are really important to start learning about, start helping women express and learn more before they even enter a marriage?
Well, I think just helping them see that it's okay and it's appropriate to learn about sex at any stage, regardless of if you're choosing to have sex in that stage is a big deal. Just letting them know, hey, you're allowed to learn about this. It's okay. I think a big part of that education is helping them to see that comprehensive, compassionate, and shame-free sex education will enable you to live your values more fully. I think that there has been a fear perpetuated in all religious cultures that I'm familiar with that learning about sex will incite so much curiosity that we just won't be able to contain ourselves. We won't be able to align our behaviors with our values. And that's just not the case. We aren't wild animals, you know, we
Yeah,
can't
totally.
control ourselves. So I think helping people to understand that the more educated you are, the better equipped you are to align your behaviors with your values. And if waiting until marriage to have sex is one of those values, good sex education can help you to do that without shame. But not only that, when you are ready to transition into a sexual relationship, you'll be much better off because you will have already worked through a lot of that shame. So you'll be able to have more comfortable sex, which we could talk about that all day, but
Mm.
they'll be able to have more shame-free experiences with sex. They'll be able to have more love in their sexual relationships because they can focus on giving and receiving instead of feeling guilty and shameful. It's just better all around in every stage if people have the education that they need.
Man, education is everything. I mean, we even see that
Mm-hmm.
in the birth prep, the pregnancy, postpartum. Education alone can reduce so many barriers and so many concerns
Mm-hmm.
and so many layers of dysfunction that can happen later. Is just being
Yes.
properly educated. And there's nothing wrong with education, even if it comes around the intimacy and sexual topics. What have you found is some of the areas of like the risks of not maybe learning about it before, even for yourself or others that you mentor? What are some of the risks of not learning about it that you've seen show up once they do become married or do become intimate?
Yeah, well, some of the major ones that we see in the research, even in early adolescence, those who receive comprehensive sex education, even just in a school setting, they on average engage in sexual behaviors later, and they're much more likely to engage in safe sex practices. So, for
Mm.
starters, you're just better off from a young age. If you receive comprehensive sexual education, you're better off in your sexual relationships, whatever those look like. You'll be safer, you'll wait longer, which we see better relationship outcomes if that happens. But for those of us who are now adults and still don't have the education, right? Seeking out education does several things. It helps us to eliminate the shame that we're talking about. It helps us to be comfortable with conversations around sex, which enables us to have healthy sexual communication, and that feeds into a healthy sexual relationship with our partner. But it also just frees us from the fear and guilt and embarrassment that's attached to our sexuality. And overall, our sexual self is a really important part of who we are as a human. It's of who we are as a woman. And if we shut that part of us off, which is really easy to do if we don't have the education, then that serves as a barrier to full embodiment, to living a present, fulfilling life in this body that is so great and allows us to live this life. Our sexual self is a part of us. And so, ignoring that part of us or not educating ourselves about that part of us, we're missing out on a whole element of ourself.
Oh my gosh, 1,000,000%. I'm over here like, preach. I so believe that so much because I feel like when we do shut down certain parts of ourself, it is like a lack of self expression and it is a lack of self expression of like who we are as individuals and our embodiment, as you mentioned. And when we shut those down for long periods of time, of course, in my world, in the pelvic health world, we start to see pain and dysfunction and lots of embarrassment and discomfort, and then
Mm-hmm.
that whole pelvis area is our safety sacral area, and so when we don't
Mm-hmm.
feel that sense of safety, which can come through education and self-expression, we start to see years and years of pelvic pain and pain with intimacy, which leads right into your work of kind of really needing the both. And I feel like so many women that we end up working with, there's so many layers underneath that
Yeah.
of lack of self-expression, a lack of education, lots of shame around our sexual intimacy, that we end
Hmm.
up doing a ton of asking them those questions, and they're like, I don't
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
know.
You
And so
become a psychotherapist and a pelvic floor
oh my
physical
gosh.
therapist.
And I'm like, just go talk to Carlie. Because really, like, when we can learn more, we can embody that practice as well. And so I think that it's so important to have that educational piece as in our youth, of course. And
Mhm.
that kind of leads me into my next question with you is majority of us are mothers here on this podcast. I know you are as well.
Mhm.
And many of us didn't grow up in households that had, conversations around sex ed. Maybe it was
Right.
left to the public school or the school to be able to give that education. So, how are you helping mothers and parents be able to support the next generation so that they can grow up more educated?
Yeah. I think the first thing is we have to, well, that I'm trying to help parents understand is that they are the sex expert in their home and that they should be the primary resource that their children are learning from. I think sex education in public school is really important. I'm all for it. I think that parents need to be doing the majority of sex educating for their
Mm-hmm.
kids. And in order to do that, we have to find a way to be comfortable having simple, consistent conversations with our kids from a really young age about bodies, about consent, about sex, about healthy sexual relationships. The days of the talk are over. They might never have been a good idea, but
Agreed.
for sure now, with how much our children will be exposed to and at such early ages, parents have to be ready to have consistent conversations across the child's life. So I'm trying to help parents prepare to do that emotionally. So work through the sexual shame so that they can have those conversations, but then also try to help parents understand what things they should be teaching at different ages. Because it can feel really intimidating to try and figure out when your children are ready for what topics. So that's something that I try to help parents understand.
Yeah, and allowing our own selves to be educated to reduce the
Mm-hmm.
shame, then being able to pass that on to our children.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of more
Mm-hmm.
tactical, I guess, because that's my question as well. I have currently a 3-year-old and an almost 6-year-old. So I'm even
Mm-hmm.
thinking about, of course, we're talking about normal anatomy and we're labeling anatomical body parts correctly.
Love
That's
it.
that's
Love it.
my my healthcare, my pelvic health background, of course. But what would be an appropriate age to start these conversations, and how would you evolve that, especially like you mentioned in the world that we're living in now with technology and social media? We have to
Mm-hmm.
be on this much sooner. When would you start, and how would that conversation evolve as the child gets older?
Yeah, great question. And I think you already provided a really good example of how to start. I think that high quality body, consent, and sex education actually starts at birth. And I know that that can sound really confusing and intimidating to parents because I'm not suggesting that you teach your toddlers about sexual intercourse. But like you mentioned, Jessica, we are teaching our toddlers the correct names for their body parts. We're teaching our toddlers that they can say no to physical affection if they don't want it. We're respecting their no's. My little boy has started saying no to hugs and kisses, and he's only 2. And I will admit that when I want a big snuggle from my toddler and he says no, I'm like a little bummed. But I don't show him that I'm bummed. I just say, okay, because I want him to know that his body is his, right?
Hmm.
That he gets to say no to physical affection. So those are the kinds of things we're starting with when kids are really young. Through the toddler and into the early childhood years, we're having conversations about private parts. We're having conversations about appropriate adult behavior or appropriate other child behavior, teenage
Mm.
behavior. We're having conversations about body safety. We're having conversations about who is allowed to touch their private parts and when, and who
Mm-hmm.
is not allowed to touch their private parts and when. Then we start having conversations about sex itself between the ages of 7 to 9
Yeah.
is generally accepted as the appropriate developmental age, specifically for children who are neurotypical. For children who have disabilities or who are neurodivergent, you might do different ages, right? But typically it's about 7 to 9 when we start explaining the basic physical experience of sexual intercourse, including pregnancy, which is a lot of the time that's how the conversations will come up. Some kids will be curious about where babies come from, some won't. So we don't wait for our children to be curious to explain to them things about sex and bodies. But that's often how it comes up is a kid will be like, wait a second, how did that baby get in there,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
7 to 9 is when we start having those conversations. And then as they get older, as they transition into their tween and teen years, we're having more conversations about what healthy relationships look like and pregnancy prevention. Every single teen should learn about pregnancy prevention regardless of when they plan to be sexually active or when you hope as a parent they will be sexually active.
Yeah, and it's so important to not place our judgment or our forethought on like when that might happen too, because that could,
Mm-hmm.
remove the necessary tools and strategies that they
Mm-hmm.
have, right? I'm sure it's so
Mm-hmm.
easy for us as parents. We just want to protect them and we want to make sure that
Totally.
they're safe. But what I'm hearing from you is like part of protecting them and keeping them safe is having these open dialogues and conversations with them early and often.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the best ways that we can protect them, not just from unsafe or unhealthy sexual behaviors that they're choosing, but also from predators or from
Mm.
sexual assault. Education, body education, safe sex education, and and body autonomy education is a huge way that we can protect our children from predators.
And I love too, like even going back to when you said now what you're doing with your 2-year-old of allowing them to feel that sense of control and autonomy over
Mm-hmm.
their body of just physical touch. Of course, like as moms, we're like, give me the snuggle. Or I'm even
Yeah.
thinking about family members, right? It can be so easy
Mm-hmm.
for grandparents who maybe didn't grow up in this generation with all of the extra information that we have now in this beautiful social world, but they might want to tickle or hug or come on over
Mm-hmm.
here, give me a kiss. You can't leave until you give me a kiss. Like I've heard aunts and uncles and grandparents.
Totally.
So, what other tools can we provide parents for those younger years too of like alternative things that they can do? Or, even how do we have that communication with those grandparents and
Mm-hmm.
family members as well?
I think a little conversation beforehand can be helpful, especially if you feel like you've noticed with family members in the past that they've been a little bit pushy or they've been expecting physical affection before a child leaves. You can send a text to your family or you can have a little chat on a phone call and just say, just so you know, we're starting to teach our toddler about bodily autonomy. We want him or her to understand that they can say no to physical affection. So will you just ask before you give them a hug or something? And if they say no, will you please respect that? My experience has been that almost everyone is so happy to oblige, especially if they understand the purpose. Occasionally, you'll have a person who might be a little stinker about it,
Yeah.
and that's okay. Them being frustrated is okay, but you protecting your child is important enough to push back on that frustration. One simple thing that I do with everyone that kind of lets them know without even having that initial conversation is before we leave somewhere, I just ask Miles, would you like to give
Mm.
grandma a hug? Would you like to give Adrian a high five goodbye? That's my best friend. She's going to feel called out, but would you
Hi,
would
Andrea.
you like to would you like to give this person a hug? Would you like to give this person a kiss? And in asking my toddler, instead of saying, okay, give grandma a hug, then I'm communicating to everyone that it's their choice.
Oh, I love that.
So
Just
that has worked
reframing.
really well. Yeah,
Yeah.
that has worked really well for me. And everyone for us has been really respectful of that.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Even just that language of being so clear and confident when
Mm-hmm.
you say it too, of like, oh, but if it's okay with you, and that's can be like more of that people pleasing tendency that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of us have, especially with our family members
Totally.
or our parents, right? So just that clear, confident message of, hey, we're doing this, and this is what we're would love your support with. I also loved how you helped the child. You almost by communicating to that family member, to that friend, by asking their permission instead of assuming that that's what they should do, it then
Mm-hmm.
again makes them think, do I want to give this person a hug or do I want to give this person a high five? It
Yeah.
gives them that choice and then they feel that body autonomy.
Yeah. Yeah. From a young age. And the only time that I've actually had to step in and say, oh, I need you to respect his no is with kids.
Mm-hmm.
Usually adults are very, very good at saying, okay, that's all right, you know, but kids sometimes if they're wrestling or tickling or giving my little boy hugs that he doesn't want, you can tell he's pushing away, then I'll just say, oh, but he doesn't want that right now. Or when he says no, I need you to listen, you know, little things like that. And usually when kids have the cue, they'll most often stop. You don't usually have to intervene much more than that. But I think doing it with kids and having your children see that you are going to defend their bodily autonomy is a big deal.
Yeah, and that peer to peer piece too. I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's really important when you were mentioning like who's allowed to look at these body parts, who's allowed to touch these body parts. I think we always
Mm-hmm.
assume adults are the ones that we need to be educating on. I think more and more research, you correct me, you tell me the stats, but I think it's important to this peer to peer conversation too,
Mm-hmm.
right?
It's vital. It's vital. And so much is happening peer to peer, even with kids that are just a little bit older. So the
Mm,
safety conversations have to include people of all ages, unfortunately. You
yeah.
know, we don't want to think about these things happening. We don't want to have these conversations with our little kids, but they're so important.
Yeah, I completely agree. What would you kind of say to a mom who maybe even in this moment, like she's listening to this and she's like, oh, I feel like that makes me uncomfortable. I'm feeling like
Mm-hmm.
my anxiousness or my shame around this, like I don't have confidence to have these conversations with my
Mm-hmm.
child. Would you advise them to start learning for themselves first and working through their own shame? And what are signs and symptoms of, women and mothers being able to identify, oh, maybe I'm not fully educated?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think to answer that question first, how can mothers tell if they're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing sexual shame or if they're not sufficiently educated? I would say if you feel uncomfortable talking about sex with someone your own age, with your spouse, with your partner, or with your children, there's some element of sexual shame or a lack of education. So that's an easy sign. If it's uncomfortable to talk about, we've got some good progress to make. The good news is that can actually change pretty quickly. I this is a little embarrassing to share, but I share it sometimes just so that people don't feel so alone in this journey. But my siblings still tease me about this sometimes. But when I was in my early 20s, I was not a child. I told my older sister and her husband, who they got married when I was 16. So he's, you know,
Wow.
he's family. He's been part of my family for more than half my life. So I'm quite comfortable with him. But I told the two of them that I didn't think I could ever get married because I couldn't see a naked bum. Like the backside felt,
Mm-hmm.
just seeing that felt like I can't even do that. Like I'm not going to be able to have sex. I was so entrenched in sexual shame and sexual fear. And now I talk about it for my job all day long. And obviously, there's a lot of years in between that. But it didn't take me very long of educating myself to realize, oh, this actually isn't scary to talk about. I just didn't know enough to have healthy conversations. So if you're feeling embarrassed talking about sex, if you feel any sense of humiliation or guilt attached to your own sexuality or sexual conversations, education will change your life in
Yeah.
so many ways, and it can actually happen pretty quickly. The thing is, if you already have kids, which so many of your listeners do, I would say don't wait to start having conversations with your kids until you're completely comfortable. because it might take you a few years to get there, which is okay, but we're going to have to start these conversations scared. And
Yeah.
we're just going to have to start having them. And it's okay if you don't totally know what you're doing. Some conversation, some education for your kids is going to be better than nothing. So I would do two things right now. I would find one book or one podcast or one online course that can help you educate yourself about healthy sexual relationships, healthy sex education for kids. Just choose one thing and start. And then the other thing I would say is schedule a day in the next 2 weeks to have one simple conversation with your child about bodies. It doesn't have to be about sex yet. You could just start with having a conversation about the actual anatomically correct terms for body parts. And if that's not something that you've used in your home from when your kids were little, then the conversation that you can schedule is, hey, I actually didn't know how important it was for you to know the correct names for your body parts, and I'm just learning about it. So I want to teach you, we're going to look at this body book. I want to teach you the correct terms for your body parts, and then we're going to chat about how we could use them a little bit better in our home instead of using the nicknames that we have been using. Have one conversation, just start. And then once you have that one, schedule one for 2 weeks later, 1 month later. These little conversations that can be 5 minutes at the dinner table, or just a little conversation that you're having at bath time or when you're changing a diaper, a conversation in a car with older kids so that they don't have to look you in the eyes. That can feel a little more comfortable. Just start having little snippets of conversations around body, consent, and sex. And as you educate yourself at the same time, you'll become more comfortable having these conversations with your kids.
Oh, well, that's such powerful tips and tricks. And the message of not waiting is so
Mm-hmm.
crucial and so important. I think so many of us, women specifically, moms, like we'll wait until we feel like the timing is perfect, or
Mm-hmm.
I know all of the information so that I can come prepared. But I think it's also important for us to know, like, we're going to fumble through it alongside
Yeah.
them. And we're going to build the confidence to be able to have those conversations with them together. And,
Mm-hmm.
we're learning just alongside their learning. And kids naturally do really want to learn. They
Mm-hmm.
naturally do want to feel like they know more. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so important what you're saying too, of just normalizing the conversation. Because I think if we convey, oh, don't talk about that, oh, don't say that word, then they're going to elicit that, shame as
Yeah.
well, to be, growing up in that type of environment where it's not normalized. I think anytime we
Right.
can really normalize, even to what you said, the birth process, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
really important to normalize that, birth is physiologically normal, and also understanding our body parts is normal, and talking about who can or cannot touch those body parts is
Yeah.
normal. And so the more we
Mm-hmm.
normalize it, it doesn't feel so packed with shame or
Mm-hmm.
embarrassment.
100%. Shame is learned. We don't,
Mm,
kids have zero sexual shame. They don't come with it, right? It's not part of the package. It's something that we learn based on our environment, based on the communication that's offered to us, based on our education. And we can play such a major role in helping our children to avoid the sexual shame that we might have learned growing up.
Yeah, and even we don't even realize sometimes we might be passing that along to them until
Mm-hmm.
we do the work, until we learn, until we educate ourselves to be able to pass down something different. So if, it was
Mm-hmm.
that way in our household, or don't talk about that hush hush taboo topic, and then we pass
Mm-hmm.
down that same thing, then that can be their journey and their story as well. So
Right.
you mentioned, like, obviously you had such a loving home. Your parents were amazing, created this great environment for you, but you did still grow up with so much shame. Do you think it was just the lack of education, and that's why you're so um, influential in this educational piece?
I think that was a major part of it. I
Mm-hmm.
just assumed that because we never talked about bodies, we never talked about menstruation, we never talked about, I mean, not only sex, we didn't talk about like kissing,
Right.
we didn't talk about anything. We never had a conversation about safe dating practices, or aside from like don't be alone, but not physically. So I just assumed that because we didn't talk about it, it must be bad.
Mm,
So I internalized the idea that we shouldn't talk about bodies, we shouldn't say the names of body parts. Sex is completely off limits because I had never heard my parents talk about it. And then I was going to church every Sunday, and I was learning about behaviors to avoid. I was learning that I should avoid having sex before marriage and that I should avoid watching pornography or whatever they're teaching.
mm,
But there was no healthy sexuality with that message of things to avoid. So it just felt like anything associated with sex, including my sexual body parts, my sexual desires, are bad. It's
mm.
just all bad and should all be avoided. And it's something to be turned off. And so I was lucky in that I had opportunities for education before I transitioned into a sexual relationship. So a lot of my journey from sexual shame into this embodied person that I am now happened before I was experiencing painful sex, for example, or
Right.
having a real struggle with sexual desire because of sexual shame. But a lot of women, and probably a lot of those of you who are listening, are already in a sexual relationship and have a child or multiple children, and you still experience a lot of sexual shame. The education piece, it can be so incredibly helpful.
Yeah, and what you're really hitting on here is the silence. The silence can
Mm-hmm.
create the shame. It's not even
Yeah.
always the pass down of like the negativity of it or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that might be. It's just the silence of the conversation
Mm-hmm.
can internally give us these beliefs or these inner stories that create the shame as well. And you're
Yeah.
totally right. I mean, we've worked with women, especially from the pelvic health side of things, of maybe they started having pain with intimacy after they had their baby, and that's when it just started to become more of the conversation, or maybe it got worse. But then when we really dig a little bit deeper and start asking more questions, it's like, no, sex has always hurt. Sex has always been
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable. I've never really had good sex drive. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's the conversation even before that where we're starting to ask about menstruation. Tell us about the first time that you used a tampon. Tell us about that experience. Was there involvement with support? Did you figure it out on your own? And what we trace back just from the work, our line of work, is that oftentimes a lot of these concerns or these painful moments actually start with this internal dialogue and story of the shame in teen
Mm-hmm.
years, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
something happened in those teen years throughout high school with a boy or this, or someone said that, and then it turned into
Yeah.
relationships. And that just carried over into their current marriage where they are in a very loving, safe relationship, but they never fully healed or explored all of those things that they missed in that area. And I'm
Right.
sure you see that
Right.
too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that so many of us who grow up in a conservative home or a religious home who have a lot of sexual shame assume that once sex aligns with our values, once we're married, there will be this flip that we can switch where we'll we'll already, or a switch that we can flip. I think I said that backwards, but that we'll all of a sudden be able to be comfortable in our sexuality. And now that we believe sex is okay, we'll just be able to fully enjoy sex and be able to feel really sexy and experience a lot of desire. But that's just not how it works. There is no switch. We
Mm-hmm.
have to learn how to embrace our sexuality and understand our sexuality in every stage. And I think embracing your sexuality or expressing your sexuality, even, that feels, those phrases feel really scary to people who want to wait until marriage or who have
Mm-hmm.
specific values around sex, as if sexual expression needs to be really outward and involve other people. And you can express your sexuality and embrace your sexuality in every stage in ways that align with your values. You can't shut it off in some stages or try to push it down, ignore it. and then expect that in other stages it will be alive and well.
Yeah, we can't shut it off in some areas and then be like, oh, well, when
Mm-hmm.
I'm married, I can just turn that
Yeah.
back on.
Awaken. Yeah.
Right? What would you say to women, maybe they're not in an intimate relationship now, they're pregnant, or maybe they are postpartum already and they have multiple children that are wanting to get started? Like, what does that even mean, Carlie? How do I embrace my sexuality? Am I supposed to do something with my partner, myself? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what would you
Mm-hmm.
say for them to start breaking that down a little bit more and
Mm-hmm.
actually get started in that process?
Well, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I would choose a book, a
Mm-hmm.
podcast, a course. I would start with the education piece.
Education, yeah.
I think opening yourself up to learning more about your sexuality can help you start to take steps towards opening yourself to your own sexuality. So education can sometimes feel a little bit less intimidating than doing sex therapy or doing a lot of internal work, which helpful too. If you want to start there, I am all for it. But education can feel like a little bit less intimidating step.
Mm,
So I would find a resource. I think one of the first ones that I would recommend to women who grew up in Christian homes, because that's mostly who I work with, the book The Great Sex Rescue is a fabulous starting point to help you let go of negative beliefs about sex and come to understand your sexuality in healthy ways. That one's by Sheila Ray Greger. The book Recovering from Purity Culture by Dr. Camden Morganti is another one that I would encourage women to start with if they grew up in purity culture. It's not, neither of these books are going to encourage you to abandon your faith in any way. They are going to encourage you to abandon sexual shame.
I love
So,
that.
fair warning.
No, I love that. And thank you so much for the titles and the references. It's so important for people to have those tools. One thing that was coming up for me in this conversation too is sometimes women feel like they have to hold it all on their own. So if
Mm-hmm.
they are in a relationship, obviously starting with education first, kind of what we've been consistently talking about, and self-educating and self-learning can be so powerful. How do they
Mm-hmm.
incorporate a partner or a husband, not only in this topic of conversation that they're starting to explore their sexuality and what that means to them, but also in the education of being on the same page to
Yeah.
carry these principles into their children together?
Mm-hmm. I love that question. I would say having conversations about why you're wanting to learn more and about your personal experience. If you haven't opened up yet to your spouse about the shame that you experience around sex, which I know can feel scary, I would encourage you to do so. To say, I'm realizing the more I learn about myself and about my relationship with sex, I'm realizing I have a lot of shame attached to it. I have fear attached to it. I think that might be contributing to why I'm not experiencing desire and why I'm having discomfort or pain with sex. And I would like your help and support as I work through this shame. And maybe there's a course or a book that you can read together or take together. They can engage with you in the education if you're willing, or if you would rather just go on the education journey on your own and then share with them what you're learning, that could be really helpful. But I think giving your spouse the opportunity to nurture you through this and to support you through this is a really big deal. I think that a lot of women feel, I don't think this, I know this because I talk to so many of them. a lot of women feel so much guilt about their lack of desire or their lack of interest in sex that they don't want to share it with their partner because they're worried that it will hurt their partner's
Mm-hmm.
feelings.
Right.
And the truth is, that's possible. It's possible that your partner or your spouse will feel some pain and discomfort about you not having desire, and that's okay because you're feeling sad about it too. It's okay to share that experience with each other, but it's also important for them to understand that your entire experience for a lifetime with sex education, body education, the lack thereof, sexual shame, those are all contributing to your experience now, and they can play a major role in helping you to overcome that and work through that. So making it a team effort is a really big deal. I will say, just on a personal note, after having Miles, my little boy who's now 2, I intercourse was really painful for me,
Mm.
and pelvic floor physical therapy, shout out, saved me. It made a massive difference really quickly for me, and I know that sometimes it takes longer, but I
Mhm.
was so grateful for pelvic floor physical therapy. But because I was experiencing pain, and because of the hormone changes and exhaustion and all the things, my desire was also incredibly low compared to where it had been previously. And I felt really bad about that because finally sex wasn't painful anymore. So I felt like, okay, now let's do this thing. But I just didn't have a lot of desire. And because I experienced a lot of guilt, I wasn't as open initially with my husband as I wish I would have been. But as soon as I said, I'm not totally sure why, but I'm not really interested in sex right now, and I could use some help
Mm.
figuring this out. I would really like this to be a team effort. Gosh, immediately it made a difference because not only was I not carrying the weight by myself, and I had some shame around it too because I was like, I'm a sex educator. I know how to build desire. This is my
Right.
job. But it still felt hard for me. As soon as I was able to share it, it felt like such a weight was lifted, but also my husband was really ready and willing to help. Anything as a team effort is better.
Oh my gosh.
So, letting go of your sexual shame, building sexual desire, coming to understand who you are as a sexual being, those are all things that your partner can help you with. And it will feel less scary and less intimidating as a team effort.
I am so glad to hear you say that because I feel like, again, it's this message of self expression, of removing the silence from the conversation. So we can
Mm-hmm.
talk about the silence, with our parents, maybe not talking about it with us or us not communicating about it with our children, but it's also us also
Yeah.
self expressing. Our own silence actually continues to stuff down shame and the pain and the discomfort that you're feeling and makes it a bigger problem than it actually
Yeah.
needs to be. And so just, hearing your journey, and thank you for sharing so vulnerably. And yes, shout out to Pelvic Floor Rehab. You also probably experienced such great healing because you were open and because you were educated and because you didn't wait and kept
Mm-hmm.
that silence to yourself and you were like,
Mm-hmm.
nope, this is not okay with me. I'm going to express that I'm in pain. I'm going to express that I have discomfort. And that those are the first steps to healing anything in
Yeah.
life. I totally
Yeah.
believe that is when we remove the silence and when we can self-express, that is the start of it. And there is this
Mm-hmm.
almost, I'm curious if you felt this, but almost like this weight lifted when you told your husband.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately, it felt lighter. It felt easier. It felt doable.
Right. And we see the same exact thing with partners. As majority of the time, partners are so willing to be
Mm-hmm.
a part of the process with you as you are learning. If anything, they're like, "Oh my gosh, thank you." Because
Yeah.
it's like we are all individually taking radical responsibility and ownership over our own bodies, but they actually do want us to thrive and they want us to feel good and they want us to feel pleasure and they also want us to not have the shame. And so majority of the time what we see is husbands are so supportive, but it's more
Yeah.
of the women holding themselves back and keeping
Mm-hmm.
that in. So I think
Yeah.
the message from both of us today is really just no more silence, self
Yeah.
express, whether it's to your partner to get support. And once you start that open dialogue asking for support, the next steps will follow.
Right. Yeah. I love that. I think that one of the things that keeps a lot of women from sharing is a a feeling that they have to have sex with their
Mm,
spouse or partner to keep them happy. Like they have this notion of duty sex and it feels so heavy. Like if I tell
yeah.
my partner that I don't want sex, or I tell them that sex is painful and that I would like to take a break from intercourse, if I share that I have a lot of sexual shame, then I will somehow mess up what we've got going, that if I stop having sex with them, they'll seek it out somewhere else, or they'll be unhappy with me, or then they won't feel loved by me, they won't feel wanted by me. And obviously, we can't control the way that our partner responds and what their experience is. But I think if you're in that headspace, then you have some belief, no matter how prevalent, you have a belief that sex is for your partner and not for you.
Mm.
And that's just not true. Women are capable of immense sexual pleasure, enjoyment, connection. Sex is just as much for you as it is for your partner. And if your partner loves you and cares about you, which I hope that they do, they want sex to be great for you too. They will be invested in your experience if you let them into it, if you allow them to see what your experience is.
That's that
So if
last
you
part.
need, yeah, if you need the belief, if you need to borrow my belief that sex was intended to be great for you too, please do so if that will help you to share with your partner your real experience with sex.
Yeah, that last part you said there, if you let them into it, right? It can
Yeah.
be even better than you've ever imagined for you. It could strengthen your emotional connection, your physical connection, all of the intimacy together when you open that conversation up with them as well. It can make
Mm-hmm.
it even better. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
borrow Carlie's belief, borrow my belief
We've
in
got
that
it.
too, of working with, thousands of women. It's so important that when we see women turn the corner to saying, yeah, that mindset shift that you talked about, if our belief system that we're living in, when they, wait, I am important. I do desire things too. I want to have more
Yeah.
intimacy with my partner, whatever it might be, in a way that also feels good for them. They communicate that. It gets just even better for
Yeah.
the couple and the relationship. It typically doesn't go the opposite direction when we open that door.
No, it doesn't. And if it does, there's some red flags that maybe you should look into.
Yes, 100%. Well, this conversation was so needed, so important. I absolutely know myself is gonna. I'm gonna look into some resources, especially to continue to learn how to educate my children better. I would love for you to share how people can find you, how they can follow along, what resources you think that they should get started with as well.
Yeah. Well, you can find me everywhere by searching the Christian Sex Educator. That's how to find me on Instagram. My website is thechristiansexeducator.com. And I have resources for parents to teach their kids. I have a guidebook for teaching younger kids. I have a guidebook for teaching tweens and teens. And then I also have online courses for single adults who are waiting for marriage, engaged couples, and married couples, if that's something that you want to look into. But I'm so happy to say that I am now not even close to the only one who's providing really high quality research based information that is free of shame. So, I mentioned a couple of books earlier that I really love. There are so many great resources out there now. So, do some Googling, find some great books. Come as you are. If you're someone who's struggling with desire and pleasure in sex, I love the book Come As You Are by Dr. Emily Nagoski. There's so many great resources now. But if you want to look at my resources, thechristiansexeducator.com is where to find them.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Carlie, for your wisdom and bringing such honest and open conversation today, and just really normalizing these types of conversations. Your body of work is so important and so needed, and so thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I feel the same way about you. I really will shout from the rooftops for my entire life how helpful pelvic floor physical therapy was for me. So thank you for all that you do as well.
Yes, absolutely.